Beautiful. Okay, love it. I've unmuted myself. Y'all, if you can stay muted so that we can have a respectful conversation, that would be fantastic. If you get called on, you're welcome to unmute yourself. We'll spotlight you. We'll have a conversation at that point. I'll give you a little bit more information as we go through as to how it's going to work. To start, though, I will invite the moderator to get us started.
Thank you, Alan. Grace be to you in Jesus' name. I'm going to start off around the interpretation because we do have simultaneous translation tonight. Welcome to everyone who's participating in this learning session. To access simultaneous translation, you just need to glide your mouse or your finger across the screen to uncover that little globe at the bottom of the page. Click on the globe and choose the language that you would like to listen to, English or French. Once you've chosen the language, Zoom will take care of moving between the speaker and the translator. So if you want it all in English, go down there and click English now. If you want it all in French, go down and click it all click French to do that now. Have a good meeting. La grâce de Jésus soit avec vous. Bienvenue à toutes les personnes participantes à cette séance d'apprentissage. Pour accéder à la traduction simultanée, il s'agit de glisser votre souris ou votre doigt sur l'écran pour voir le petit globe en bas de page. Cliquez sur le globe et choisir la langue dans laquelle vous voulez écouter, français ou anglais. Une fois que vous aurez choisi la langue, Zoom se changera de passer de l'orateur au traducteur. Bonne réunion. So I am very glad that everyone is able to be here tonight. And for those who aren't, I'm glad that you're able to join in the recorded session that will be up on the Feedloop site for us. I'd like to begin with a moment for us to just stop and be. For us to recognize where we are. We're coming from many places across this land. And we are coming from many places in our lives, living on this land. As someone who is a settler and descendant of settlers, I recognize the brokenness of relationship that has happened and continues to happen between those of us who are newcomers to this land and the First Nations. The elders, the children, the adults. We've had broken relationship for as long as settlers have come to this place. Historically, that's part of the story of the United Church of Canada. And it becomes important when we recognize the territory of the place that we are on, when we recognize the people whose land this is, who are a part of this land, that we don't just see this as something that's historic, but that is something that is right now. And that as a church and as individuals, we have a responsibility in this recognition of territory and of the people to commit ourselves again and again and again to the work of right relationship, to travel in a good way. And so tonight, I am coming to you from the lands, the unceded lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I give thanks that I am able to work and live in this place. I'd ask you to think about what it is that you need to be doing to work for right relationship, to work for truth and reconciliation and reparation. And I would invite you to name the peoples whose lands you are on this night. May God help us in the work that we are doing and in the work that needs to be done. As the peoples and the treaties are named in the chat list, I would invite us to move into our call to worship. I believe our call to worship is the first video that we'll be sharing.
We come from where we are and know that we are called to this community in this time. With deep spirituality, in bold discipleship, and for daring justice, we come to receive what is offered. We pray that we might be present in this time, that we might be brave. We come from where we are and know that we are called to this community in this time. With deep spirituality, in bold discipleship, and for daring justice, we come to receive what is offered. We pray that we might be present in this time, that we might be brave, bold, and blessed. Thanks be to God.
Jesus and his disciples headed out for the villages around Caesarea Philippi. As they walked, he asked, "Who do the people say that I am?" "Que disent les gens à mon sujet? Qui suis-je d'après eux?" They answered, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." Alors il leur demanda, "Et vous? Qui dites-vous que je suis?" Peter gave the answer, "You are the Christ, the Messiah. Tu es le Messie." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Jesus warned them to keep quiet, not to breathe a word of it to anyone. Il leur ordonna de ne le dire à personne.
Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him.
There is room for all in the shadow of God's wings. There is room for all sheltered in God's love. And I rejoice and sing, my refuge and my rock in whom I trust. There is room for all. There is room for all. On a tous en place dans les grands jardins de Dieu. On a tous en place dans les cœurs de Dieu. Et c'est pourquoi les jours levés au ciel, je viens chanter ma joie. J'ai trouvé ma place, je suis bien chez toi. J'ai trouvé ma place, mon refuge et ma maison. J'ai trouvé sa grâce quand j'ai dit son nom. Et c'est pourquoi les yeux levés au ciel, je viens chanter ma joie. J'ai trouvé ma place, je me sens chez moi. There is room for all in the shadow of God's wings. There is room for all, sheltered in God's love. And I rejoice in seeing my refuge and my rock in whom I trust. There is room for all. There is room for all. Oh, there is room for all. There is room for all.
Thank you once again, worship team. It's a little different, I think, trying to hold this general council in worship in a digital space as well. I mean, it's a little different in some ways. I mean, we always try to hold ourselves in worship, but we're trying to be super intentional. And I think we're doing okay, but I still feel like the digital aspect of it all, it's a different way of being held in worship. And I appreciate that we're doing it and we're all trying to feel that as well. And I loved seeing many of you singing and moving along to the music as well. My name is Alan Buckingham. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. I'm going to probably speak in English most of the time because it's easier for folks with the interpretation to not be flipping back and forth all the time. So just so you're aware, that's my thought this time, but I'm open to feedback as the best way to do that. I recognize for some folks and for the interpreters, if I just randomly switch to French in the middle of a paragraph and things, that it just takes time to flick around and do the settings. So I'm going to stay in one language for now. Maybe next time I'll try the whole thing in French. That'll be good for me. I speak French to my kid all the time, every day, all day, when they're home, but it's still different to do the meeting. So that would be a fun challenge. We'll see how I feel next time around. This is a time to learn more about some of the items before us as a council. This is not the time for opinion or debate. And that's not because I want to limit discussion or debate. We just want to help everyone learn more about the topics before us before we hit the discussion phase. In the discussion phase, you will have time in smaller groups to really have a discussion. Our groups are kind of 14 to 16 in size, and we're hoping that with the same amount, more or less, of time that we had at General Council 43 in groups of 30 plus, in groups of 16, we'll be able to really hear from all the voices around there and discuss in depth as best we can the proposals. After the discussion phase, where you will share your opinions, you'll have that debate. The key notes from that, which the group will agree on, will be sent to the facilitation team, whose job it is to pull the commonalities and the pieces of wisdom from each of those groups and combine them together for a suggested way forward. Those will be presented and we'll have time to think about them, to talk amongst ourselves about them before we hit the decision phase. And that's where we will decide about the suggested ways forward and how we wish to deal with them, as well as thus all the business that is before the council. In this learning session and in all their learning sessions, we are trying to give you as much information as we can to encourage a fulsome discussion to help us make good decisions. But there's still lots of work before us and not as much time as would be ideal to deal with all the work that is before us. We're trying to do our best with what we have, though. I and those here for this learning session are counting on you all having read the proposals. We're counting on you having watched the videos for this session as well. And I know the videos went up in the FeedLoop site recently. We're working on our processes, as I said off the top, and we're hoping to have those in by sometime the Monday before the learning session. The process is still being sorted, but there will be new videos in the session for the week, each week before we meet. I encourage you to ask questions beforehand as well in the Q&A tab for that session in FeedLoop. So for the next session, session 2, if you can find the Q&A and write your questions in there, and we'll be getting better ways for people to answer those questions, the presenters as well. Like I said, we're all still learning this. And so I encourage you, if you have questions after that, to put them in as well, and we'll get answers to as many questions as we can. So now, depending on your screen setup, you probably can't see that in FeedLoop, and that's fine. We're not going to be dealing with that right now. I just want you to be able to see the presenters here. We're not using the equity team to monitor the questions being asked in this either. So please, if you've already asked a question, or if you feel like you're from a group of folks that have already asked lots of questions, maybe just wait to see if there's somebody else who has a question to ask before raising your hand to answer the question. I am not an expert on the process like the moderator who's done it 5 million times to how to raise your hand and asking you to do the right thing, and now's the time. I was in awe. I am not that good. Have patience with me too, please. But by all means, we want to hear your questions. I'm not saying don't share your questions. If you have a question, please share it at the appropriate time. I hope that's reasonably clear. That's all I'm hoping for. Reasonably clear. Super clear would be amazing. Reasonably clear would be great. We're going to move into our first block now. The first proposal is NS02, Community of Faith Quorum. Hopefully you have watched Blaine's video. We're counting on that. I'm going to invite Blaine to be spotlit, that's a fun word, with me. And we can start and see if, Blaine, you have any questions you need to answer, anything else to say, and then invite folks to raise their digital hand with the reactions. Raise hand if you have questions about this proposal.
No, I didn't see any questions pertaining to this in the Q&A. I had a couple of inquiries directly, and I answered those directly. I think the proposal and my video is pretty clear. Basically, it wants to change the quorum rules for congregational or pastoral charge meetings to be the same as they are for governing body meetings with respect to the attendance of the ministry personnel or the alternatives that are listed in the policy.
Perfect. Thanks, Blaine. Don Anderson, I see a question there.
Okay, I've looked for Q&A. Where is it?
So in the FeedLoop, you've got your main section, and then on the right-hand side is the Q&A. And I believe that in the email sent out earlier from the communications folks, it kind of tried to direct you there, and we will once again in further emails direct that so you can find the Q&A section in FeedLoop to make sure you get your questions there if you have them.
Now, with the limited time, do we put stuff into that question thing, or do
So if you have questions right now today, ask your question right now. Before the next session, put in the Q&A for next time. After this session, put in the Q&A session. In this session, ask me your question. Well, ask Blaine your question. You have a question right now, Don? If not, I'll move on. Okay, cool. Murray, do you have a question?
I'm wondering, Blaine, thank you for this. I'm wondering if there was consideration, or if there ought to be consideration. The minister is not a member of the community of faith. The minister is a member in the Office of Vocation. And if that has any effect on the quorum role, because that is another difference between the community of faith meeting and the governing body meeting. I guess I'll hold my other comment because my other comment is for the decision session, not the learning session.
Yeah, my only comment, Maria, is I think that's exactly why the rules are written the way they are. Is because the minister personnel being a member of the governing body, has a claim to quorum, and so to speak. This proposal is worrying less about where the membership lies and more about who's present and who's able to be part of discussions. I suspect that's my guess as to why the rules are written the way they are now and have been this way for as long as I've known the rules of the church.
Okay, I would presume then that we would want to see a corollary change so that the minister is automatically a corresponding member of the community of faith or something like that. But that would be something that that Michael would tell us is needed if and when the time comes. Thanks, Blaine.
Right. Yeah, it's just kind of the spirit of it is to involve the minister in congregational meetings and to be aware of them and to be present for them. All the implications of that would follow from that spirit.
Great. I'm going to try and keep us moving here. We got a few proposals to get in here. Maria Karen, do you have a question for Blaine on this one?
Yeah, I have to figure out how to put my hand down. Oh, there we go. So my concern is for smaller congregations and rural congregations. What effect might that have for those of us who don't necessarily have ordained personnel close at hand, and where the newer supervisor could be like a several-hour drive away? Like, would we be looking at something that would prevent a church from having a meeting if they can't get someone from goodness knows where to come out?
Well, yeah, and if this policy was changed, it would require those times when you're having a congregational or a pastoral church meeting to have the ministry personnel or one of the other alternates, like the supervisor, present. It's already the case for governing body meetings. So this is simply adding it it would depend on how many congregational or pastoral charge meetings would happen over the course of time as to how many extra meetings this would be.
Oh, that's a good idea. Someone said in the chat there, present by Zoom. Then again, not necessarily, because internet out here isn't always very good. But yeah, that's my oh darn, I'm sorry, brain fog. I'm trying to ask to clarify the question a bit and it is not working. Oh yeah, the person was saying that that's what we already do for governing body meetings, but that's different because the governing body is in a city. The governing body is much more likely to have a minister in the same city. A congregation, not so much.
Yeah, by governing body, I mean it's referring to the local church board or council. That's what the governing body is in this context.
Okay, that's my mistake.
No,
Sorry.
no, that's fine. Now we use that phrase a lot. I think the manual got rid of board and session and used governing body to be a catch-all, and we ended up catching more than we wanted to with that net sometimes. But yeah, good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, folks. If there's other questions for Blaine at this moment, I'll take them. I do want to move us to the next one if we can. Remember, if you do have questions in the feed loop, which is where you found how to get into this, the link to get in here in the feed loop, in the Q&A section, please enter your questions and we'll make sure we get you answers as best we can. We want to try and get all the information out. Penny, is that a question for Blaine?
I just noticed on the chat that there's a question. I don't think I heard the answer yet. It was, could the person be present by Zoom?
Yeah, I think the rules of how we meet don't change, and we do have the ability to meet in multiple ways in person, and as long as we're interacting with each other, it's a legitimate way to meet if it's necessary.
If the meeting were in person, could the minister be present by Zoom?
No, I say this isn't asking us to change any of the rules about how we meet currently, and I think that's already a possibility when necessary.
Thank you.
That's my understanding, anyway. I know we've been doing it, and we haven't had an face-to-face governing body meeting in my church for 2 years.
Sue Broderick, do you have a question for Blaine before we move on to our next one?
Just noticed in the chat that the question came, is that only related to changes in pastoral relations, congregational meetings, I presume is the question, and that's the question I saw in the chat.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't noticed that yet, but actually, no. When it's a congregational meeting with respect to the change of pastoral relations, there's already a special quorum rule that involves somebody appointed by the region to attend. This would be for your regular, ordinary, general and special meetings of your pastoral charge of congregation.
Great. Thank you, Blaine. Thank you, folks, for questions. I'm going to move us along to NS03 now, Regional Council Ending Pastoral Relationship. Larry Durketch and Paul Conway, I believe, are here to answer questions on this one. And I know they've been busy trying to answer some of those in the Q&A too, which is much appreciated. Any questions for folks now for Larry? Don?
Don is muted.
Yes, I think Don's trying to get his unmute going. It looks like I see concentration there. I'm sure it's happening. Don, will you try to get yourself unmuted? Shirley, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, I was just wondering, it seems the proposal is to expedite a process to end an unsatisfactory pastoral relationship. I'm wondering what the standard timeline is if we use current processes with the Office of Vocation involved.
My understanding, thanks for the question. At the present time, the Office of Vocation doesn't have the power to end a pastoral relationship. Its business is about discipline in this situation would be discipline of the ministry personnel. My understanding is that the only processes available to end a pastoral relationship is if the ministry personnel chooses to leave, or the community of faith holds a meeting to ask for a change in pastoral relations. But if the Office of Vocation rules that a ministry personnel is no longer fit for ministry and gets placed on the discontinued list, then the region can act to end the pastoral relationship, but not before that.
So I guess my question would be, how long does that process usually take?
Well,
it seems the proposal is around expediting a process. So I'm just wondering, it's a timing question, I think.
Well, it's more than that, because for one thing, to answer your first question, in our experience, the process took more than a year. And that year didn't start ticking till long after the relationship with the pastoral relationship was really in a very broken state. But should the Office of Vocation not come to the conclusion to put the ministry personnel on the discontinued service list, that still does not mean that the pastoral relationship shouldn't be ended. If the Office of Vocation made that decision, then really there is still no other options other than the ministry personnel choosing to leave and the community of faith having a meeting to ask for a change in pastoral relations. And if the ministry personnel says, I'm not going anywhere, then that leaves it that the only option left then is for the community of faith to have a meeting.
Thanks, Larry. I hope that got your question, Shirley. I'm going to move to, and I know it's a tough one, and we're trying to get you answers here, and I hope that folks, we're gonna, if you don't feel you got your question answered fully, please do try to share it within FeedLoop so that we can try and get you more fulsome answers as needed. But we do want to try and keep ourselves moving. We got a lot to get to. Don, looks like you're ready. Your question for Larry.
Yeah, I think I clicked Zoom and I just went out of click FeedLoop and I just went out of Zoom. Got three things, and stop me if this is more debate than if it is question, or four things. First of all, the safeguards of the church include the freedom of worship at present enjoyed by the negotiating congregation shall not be interfered with in the United Church. And one of the big freedoms that they had was choosing their own clergy. We used to have a definition of the conciliar system as a system in which decisions were made by councils rather than individuals, and in which each council had specific and peculiar rights and responsibilities, which may not be assumed by another council. But with time, we've been moving to a more hierarchical system, and we've forgotten that second clause. Thirdly, I'm aware of cases where the next higher court has abused the process.
Sorry, Don, I'm gonna ask if you have a question. I know you got a lot of background to your questions, but do you have a question that you need an answer to here? Discussion, we can absolutely do in the discussion phase.
Is there not sufficient process then in the manual to deal with the concern simply by suspending the minister until the question can be dealt with?
Larry, do you have a thought on that? You're not necessarily the expert on this either, and we can get you an answer, Don, to that too, if Larry, you don't have anything you want to contribute.
I am not, but I can tell you in our experience, we went over 3 years using many of the processes that currently exist in the manual, and that left the congregation in a very conflicted state for a very prolonged period of time for those processes all to take place. All the while, all objective observers at the region, and it goes back to Presbyterian Conference because this started taking place before the structural change of the church. Everybody was saying this is broken; it has to end. But there was no easy way to do that. Just to respond directly to, yes, the role of the community of faith as a council can certainly take the step to meet and consider a question on the change in pastoral relations. But in our experience, when this situation happens in the midst of conflict, it becomes a very difficult thing for the community of faith to act like a council, because they start demanding to know a whole lot of information that really ought to be kept confidential. It implicates questions about people's behavior. It becomes a very messy thing for a community of faith to be a court in that regard, which is why there needs to be some supervisory council that has the power to do something.
Thanks, Larry. And I'm going to remind us, we want to keep our answers as concise as we can. I know we need the background. It helps us make the decisions. I get that, right? But we're trying to get to a lot of stuff too. So thank you for your questions. John Watson, if you have a quick question here, that'd be great.
Thank you. I'm wondering about the definition of dysfunctional. That can have a lot of different meanings. And Larry, the descriptions you've given talks about some of them, but I think if you're going to do this, there needs to be a better definition of what you mean by dysfunctional. We live in a dysfunctional world.
So I think that's a great question. Finding a definition for dysfunctional, I think, would be super useful. Larry, I don't know that you defining it here is going to necessarily be what moves us forward well, but I encourage you, John, to note that. Make sure you bring that up. Say that a definition, in the discussion, a definition is needed for dysfunctional in order for this to move forward. We can try. I just don't know that this is the time or place that we're going to get a good definition of that either, right? Tammy, do you have a question for Larry?
Tammy Spires, Nagahaga Regional Council, pronouns she, her, elle. Just very quickly, in reading this proposal, what safeguards are going to be there for ministry personnel if something should happen where it's not dysfunction on the ministry personnel, but it's more dysfunction of the community or the regional council?
I think that's an excellent question. There was one comment in the comment box that said that the regional council should always be involved in these discussions and decisions rather than it being a unilateral decision of the congregation. And there do need to be clear definitions in place, but I think part of our understanding, and it is built in many ways into the manual, is that important decisions need to be consultative so that there are safeguards against making precipitous decisions that are really ill-informed. I think it's a really excellent question.
Great, thanks, folks. I'm going to thank you, Larry. Thank you, questioners. If I can get hands down, I think we've heard from everybody whose hand was up. And I'm going to try and move us along to the next proposal. I am trying to make sure we give people time and we can hear. We're getting a little bit into discussion and opinion, both in the question and in the answer, which I get, right? But I want to try and steer us, but it's hard for me. So I want you to keep an eye on me if you can when you're answering and asking, and so that I can try and help cajole appropriately without having to jump in. I struggle to jump in and interrupt people. So thank you, Larry. Thank you, questioners. We're going to move on now to RC15, maternity leave. Heather Ferrier and Ann Cameron, I believe, are here for that. So Shirley, you have a question for this one? If not, I'll get you to drop your hand if you don't mind. And if anybody has a question for RC15 proposal, please raise your virtual hand by clicking on the reactions and the raise hand.
Oh, while we wait to see if there is anybody, I know there was a question in the Q&A about how many maternity and or parental leaves we see in the United Church. The numbers are very, very low. Last year there was 1. The year before that there was 4. The year before that there was 5. And those are the numbers I received from Adam Hanley this week. So that was lower than even I had expected. I see some hands up there.
Yes, let's go to Scott Reynolds first.
Thanks. As someone who is responsible for 2 of those parental leaves in the last few years, I was just curious what the split actually is between people taking parental leave and people taking maternity leave.
That's a great question. I don't think we know. So just the background, the numbers that I received from Adam were based on the Benefits Center paperwork that they'd received from people who wanted to continue their health and dental through their parental leave. So we don't actually collect stats on people who are taking parental and maternity leave, which is one of the actions requested in the proposal, is that we actually survey the people who've taken this kind of leave and find out more about their experience. But that's very relevant to the total cost, because we are proposing that we move the cost away from the local community of faith to a higher body. We know that somebody who gives birth receives 26 weeks at 40%, well, 25 weeks at 40% of their salary as a top up. The first week they can receive 95% while they wait for EI to kick in. But a parent who is not giving birth, so a partner to the person who gave birth or someone adopting, only receives 10 weeks. So that's less than half the amount. So yeah, if I know several ministry personnel who've adopted in recent years. So when we factor in non-birthing partners and those adopting, that means the cost to whoever is paying for it would drop significantly. But that also speaks to why we're concerned about discrimination against female ministry personnel, because right now with local communities of faith covering the cost of the top up, the amount that they're carrying is much higher if it's a female minister who's given birth than if it's a male minister who's a partner or somebody who's adopting. That was a very long answer. Sorry.
Sometimes we need the long answers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Maria Karen, question for Heather.
You're muted, hon.
Thank you. I was just wanting to ask as far as making sure that any outreach, like I noticed in the thing, there was something about like educating the congregation. And I'm just wondering how we could be careful to make sure that that's respectful to the congregation as well. Because sometimes in this day and age, if you say the wrong thing, I mean, we don't want to make the congregation feel vilified for saying the wrong thing. And what sort of safeguards might we put into that where it's kind, where it's, you know, a mistake was made and not, you know, you meanies, you know.
Well, part of our action that we were suggesting was putting in more support before leave is taken, during leave, and after leave. So that might be in the form of a pastoral charge supervisor stepping in to help out, or a regional minister being part of a conversation. This was presented previously to the Association of United Church Clergy in Region 15, and several folks named the problem of being the person who has to explain a policy to a church that is going to cost them money potentially when you are the reason the leave is happening, that it would be easier to have some of these conversations if there was a third party who came in, and that would be an opportunity where in that conversation, if people were saying things that were inappropriate or discriminatory, such as we wouldn't have hired a woman if we knew known this was going to happen, as was said to me, in that case, the third party person could help folks use more correct language and make them aware of the policies of the United Church without the minister necessarily being present or having to be present. So I think that would, yeah.
Yeah, I recognize there's lots to learn here, and I know some of this is in the proposal document as well. So I do encourage folks to read that. I hope you have read that. I do want to keep us moving. We're already quite, we're not where we hoped to be. Let's just put it that way. But that doesn't mean we won't be able to sort this out. I'm gonna go to Kathy next. Adam, if you have fill in information quickly, I'll get to you. But Kathy Yamashita had a question. No, her hand is down now.
No, I have a question, Alan.
Perfect.
What I wanted to ask was, I know that a person who becomes pregnant can take a year off and get paid through the maternity leave offered by, what is it, EI, employment insurance, through the federal government. So if you paid into EI for a certain amount of time, then you can take a 1-year maternity leave and you get a certain portion of your paycheck. Are you talking about a top up, or are ministers not allowed to collect that?
Yes. So when someone becomes a parent, they can collect EI for 50 weeks if a child has been birthed into their family, fewer weeks if it's an adoption, because there's 16 weeks for maternity leave, and then you can add another 10 parental leave in terms of, sorry, those are the numbers for the top up. I'm confusing my numbers. So one is EI, that's separate. So if you qualify for EI and you are ministry personnel, it is the policy of the United Church of Canada that ministry personnel receive a top up of 40% on top of the 55% they receive through EI. So that would give you 95% of your salary, but it's not for the full period that you can collect EI. It is only for 26 weeks if you have given birth and are taking all the leave yourself, or 10 weeks if you have adopted or your partner has given birth.
Thank you for a very concise answer.
You're welcome. I'm trying.
Murray, question from you.
I've been thinking about it. I'm going to hold it for the discussion session.
Thank you, Murray. Adam, you have something you want to add in here?
Yep. So I am the staff person at the General Counsel Office that assists many ministry personnel and their treasurers as they navigate this policy, which is complicated between navigating the EI system and the top-up system. And I just wanted to clarify a question in the chat. The statistics that we provided to Heather were the only stats we could grasp about numbers are from the number of people who get a letter from the benefit center asking if they wish to continue pensions and benefit contributions because through our ADP data, it was flagged that the minister was on maternity leave or parental leave. So it's not people that chose to continue benefits. It's everyone that was flagged through the ADP data that they were on one of these leaves.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Heather, and thank you all of our questioners. So just so you get a sense, folks, and I don't want to overly rush us, I just want us to be really conscious, you know, and I know we're trying to do a lot because we have a lot of proposals we want to learn about. And we want to give us all time for that, but we also want to fit everything in. And this is our challenge. So my timer said we took 28 minutes for what we were hoping would be 10-ish, just so we're all aware, right? So as we keep going forward, try to think through, is this a question? Ask the question. Is this an opinion? Do I need to share a thing? Questioner and answerer, both of you. Try to share the information in another place. It's important information to get out. I respect that. But if we can try and be concise with less opinion, more quick answers, that's just helpful for this process. And I know it's not perfect, and we're going to keep trying to make it better. And we're also being held by worship here. And I want us to go there now. It's time to hear another piece of music.
Des questions pertinentes venaient toujours des disciples, mais cette fois-ci, c'est notre Seigneur lui-même qui disait à ses disciples, « Qui dit-on que je suis ?» Et ensuite, il disait à ses disciples, « Qui dites-vous que je suis ?» Et moi, je réponds en tant que serviteur du Maître. Il est mon Seigneur, mon Rédempteur, mon Maître et mon Libérateur. Ma consolation dans les jours difficiles. Je place, Seigneur, ma confiance en toi, le Messie, le Roi de Dieu. Et nous attendons ta venue. Et nous nous préparons pour le grand festin.
Clearly, that was not a song. It was a lovely testimony, and thank you for that testimony. I've moved my agenda too far. I was getting ahead of myself. We'll hear a song later, so thank you for your grace and patience with us all. We're into the next section here. I'm going to invite Keith Simmons to join me in the spotlight. And if folks have questions about PM03 pension equity, please raise your virtual hand through the reactions button in Zoom. And if you have them that you want to ask now, if you don't need to. We don't need to have questions. Keith can be super clear in his description and understanding and in his answers in the Q&A and feed loop. Keith, did you have anything you needed to add?
There were some questions raised in the Q&A, I guess more by another video that was also given with relation to this proposal. And I just want to say that for me, the underlying concern around this proposal is equity for retirees. And if it's clear that Canadian government legislation says that we can't provide equity for retirees through our pension plan, then the proposal still asks us to see what we can do, because clearly we're becoming more and more disparate in our earnings as ministry personnel, and recognizing much more the effectiveness and the faithful contribution of work done by other folk who aren't ministry personnel, and what that results in terms of a pension. So for me, is what do we do about equity amongst all of us in terms of our pension lives? And I know the government of Canada, which has made those regulations, has also come up with other solutions and other ways to deal with that problem. So for me, that would be the underlying basis of this, and perhaps we could adapt it, modify it more in discussion if it needs to be.
Thanks, Keith. I appreciate the clarity and the questioning of your goal in answering the question. What I hear is that you're hoping to help us work through some kind of solution and not trying to debate the finer points of solution. Alan Hall, you have a question or response or piece of info that you want to get out on PM03 here quick?
Hi, folks. Yes, that wider question that Keith just referenced was also part of the review and study that was undertaken in response to the proposal that came to GC43 and considered by the executive of the General Council. And the conclusion was that pension fund, a registered pension fund, is not a vehicle to provide that level or kind of equity in a retirement environment. Guaranteed living income is a means that we might do as a society, but not one that we could reasonably fund through the church. We looked at in the review alternative outside of registered plans, and the tax regimens against them make them largely unaffordable and inefficient as a vehicle to augment a registered pension income.
Thanks, Alan. It's a little bit of context, a little bit of getting into some details. I know you've given the video, and if there's documents folks could look at for more info too, Alan, we'll make sure that we get those out to people, because some of that background stuff and other things that people have looked at in the past is relevant to the conversation that I hear Keith asking for. Any other questions before we move on here quick? Not seeing any. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Alan. And I'm going to move us on to SW06, Ministry Personnel Salary Equity, and Liz McKenzie is going to join me in the spotlight for this one. So anybody, if you have questions for this one, please raise your virtual hand. And Liz, if you have anything that you have not already said that you need to add in, or an answer to a question you've seen, please do so here.
I did see a question in the Q&A that I was not able to answer because FeedLoop wouldn't give me access. So it was about, the question had the gist of, is this about giving ministry personnel more information and tools that will lead to equity in compensation? And that is part of this proposal, but not all of this proposal. It is also a question of ensuring that equity-seeking ministry personnel have the information that they need in order to make reasonable negotiating strategy, but also to ensure that congregations, communities of faith, pay their ministry personnel, if they have more than one, equitably between the two of them as well, or three, or however many.
Great, thank you, Liz. Any questions folks have at the moment for this? Remembering that we can put questions in later and we will get answers as best we can as well. Not seeing any. This means that you have done a great job describing everything, Liz, and it is super clear. So thank you for all the time and effort you put into that. There may be questions that come and we'll make sure you get them and that you can get them answered. But for now, I'm going to thank you for that. And now, if I'm reading my agenda correctly, is when we can experience some music. And I like that. We're going to get it closer together than we might have. So thank you all for asking the questions that needed to be asked and not asking the questions that don't need to be asked.
Take me as I am. Summon out what I shall be. Send your seal upon my heart and live in me. Take, oh, I shall be. Set your seal upon my heart and live in me.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. La prochaine proposition, c'est Nicole 03 la table. Peut-être je peux juste faire celui-là en français, là. Alors, je vais inviter Marie-Claude Manga et Eric Herbert-Daly à me joindre. Et on va voir s'il y a des questions à propos de cette proposition. Alors, tout le monde, si vous avez une question pour Marie-Claude ou Eric qui n'est pas sélectionné à l'instant.
Il faudrait juste que la traduction passe au poste anglais, je pense. Et puis, j'aimerais juste répondre à une question qui est parue dans le Q&A. Et la question était au sujet du fait que est-ce que cette proposition obligerait un renvoi, un remit, pour être capable d'être accepté? Et la réponse à cette question-là est que ça va dépendre de la manière qu'on va vouloir le reconnaître. Alors, si on veut reconnaître la table des ministères en français dans le manuel, ça va dépendre de la manière à laquelle on va s'y prendre pour déterminer si ça nécessite un renvoi, un remit.
Merci, Eric. Y a-t-il des autres questions? Les gens, si oui, s'il vous plaît, levez votre main virtuelle. Francis, please feel free to ask your question.
OK, bonsoir, merci. Je voulais demander si on a des statistiques à propos de où la majorité des ministères francophones se trouvent. J'assume que c'est Québec, mais je voudrais savoir s'il y a des autres endroits autour du Canada.
Merci, Francis. Marie-Claude, connais-tu la réponse ou Eric?
Je vais laisser Eric répondre à cette question-là.
Alors, il y a des ministères en français qui existent à Winnipeg, en Ontario, en Nouvelle-Écosse. On a des ministères un peu partout à travers le Canada. Puis souvent, c'est des ministères bilingues aussi. Hein? Alors, il y a souvent des communautés de foi qui font des cultes et des activités en français, surtout au niveau des ministères auprès des enfants. On voit beaucoup de travail auprès des enfants.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. And I'm just going to say in English for the bespoke folks, Eric can stay up spotlight the whole time. Merci beaucoup. Cathy, une question de vous, là.
J'ai une question. Maintenant, est-ce qu'il y a la table de ministère I'll switch to English. I'm not very good in French. You are not being recognized. This is your reality at the present time. I just need to.
Nous ne sommes pas retenus. Je n'ai pas bien compris votre question.
Oui, nous ne sommes pas reconnus. Nous ne sommes pas reconnus dans le manuel actuellement, non.
Non, pour le moment, dans le manuel, ce n'est pas encore reconnu. Donc, on travaille avec, au niveau national et de façon spécifique au Québec, on travaille avec le conseil régional. Mais sinon, on intervient quand même au niveau national. Mais notre intervention n'est pas encore officielle dans le sens où nous demandons maintenant. On aimerait bien que nous soyons reconnus au niveau national pour que nous puissions avoir ces contacts-là de façon officielle et surtout avoir la possibilité d'adresser nos recommandations et nos propositions directement au Conseil national. Et puis aussi pour que la table soit reconnue et que on puisse avoir que ce ne soit pas des choses spontanées, que ça soit reconnu et même si on n'est pas là, que ça continue. La continuité, on voudrait vraiment qu'il y ait une continuité. Je ne sais pas si Eric a d'autres questions, a une autre réponse ou bien des remarques additionnelles, mais c'est vraiment à ce niveau-là. C'est la continuité qu'on voudrait garantir pour la table au niveau de l'Église unie du Canada.
Merci, Marie-Claude. On n'a besoin pas d'intervention additionnelle, là. Non, je m'en fous. Eric, si tu as des choses à dire, tu peux le dire, là. Non, pas de choses additionnelles à dire. Alors, y a-t-il des autres questions à l'instant? En voyant pas des autres. Merci Marie-Claude, merci Eric. Et we're gonna move on to
Alan, désolé, il y a une question dans le chat. Oui, il y a quelques questions dans le chat sur Zoom. Quelqu'un me demandait désolé. Ouais, il y a Internet là. C'est Jingle Ayupan qui demandait est-ce qu'il y a francophones ici qui sont, je ne sais pas le mot en français, spearheaded par Reverend Isaac Kamta? Eric, Marie-Claude, est-ce que vous avez une réponse pour ça?
Oui, c'est quoi la question? Excuse-moi.
C'est une question de quelqu'un dans le chat qui demandait s'il y a un francophone UC qui est, je ne sais pas le mot en français, spearheaded.
La réponse est déjà dans le chat, mais
okay,
oui, il y en a un. Oui,
il y en a un. Yes.
Okay. Cool. Sue, do you have a question on this one now? Sue Broderick?
I think the questions in the chat are people chatting about the new Francophone ministry in Toronto and
yeah.
That. And so it's not really questions directed to this proposal.
That's great. Thanks, Sue. We're good. I'm going to move us along now. Merci encore, Marie-Claude. Into NIC 01, Restructuring the Indigenous Church. I'm going to, before we spotlight Murray Pruden and John Thompson, Leanne Shimoda, I believe all three, we're going to watch their video that was requested that we just watch this little intro bit on that. So if I can get to that video played now, that would be stellar. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the presentation on NIC 01, National Indigenous Circle, Restructuring of the Indigenous Church. The National Indigenous Circle is bringing one proposal to General Council 44. Part of the wider church's reorganization meant the closure of all conferences and the remaking of the church into regions. This change has been hard on the Indigenous United Church. Since the change, we, the National Indigenous Council, have been given the powers and responsibilities of a region. However, we, the National Indigenous Council, have not given up on the idea of a much larger vision for the Indigenous Church. Based on grassroots discussion and discernment, the National Indigenous Council believes it is time for us to move toward a different relationship with the United Church. It is time to set aside the idea of missions to the Indians and move toward being partners in God's call to the earth. We need to journey together while allowing one another to be who we are, the United Church with all its complexity and the National Indigenous Circle with similar complexity. Though in the graph provided here, the Indigenous United Church looks very simple, but if you take and look at the pixels of each color in this graph, you will notice that those can be the representation of the numerous members of the Indigenous Church. Our proposal to the General Council asks that the General Secretary identify and remove all the structured barriers to developing and sustaining a self-determining Indigenous church within the United Church of Canada. We have also asked that the conversation of restructuring, right relationships, and reparations continue between the National Indigenous Circle and a wider United Church. Currently, the National Indigenous Council is creating a proposal gathering for our Indigenous church membership on April 20th, 2022. All are invited, and we're asking for participation. If you have further questions and need further information, please contact Executive Minister Murray Pruden in the email provided below. In closing, I'd like to state all my relations together, we can walk with Creator in a good way to support one another in church, faith, and spirituality. As it states here in Romans 12:16, be in harmony with one another. Do not have a high opinion of yourselves, but be in agreement with common people. Do not give yourselves an air of wisdom. This proposal begins to address the Indigenous framework envisioned in the Calls of the Church and the Caretaker's Report that was accepted by General Council 43. It is the next step in creating a truly Indigenous United Church. On behalf of the National Indigenous Council, I'd like to say thank you, thank you, thank you for your leadership and your commitment to our proposal. And at this time, we open question time with our National Indigenous Council membership.
You don't even need me. That's great. So it's question time. And if I can just get a few folks in the spotlight with me, because I do not have the answers to the questions. So Murray Pruden, John Thompson, and Leanne Schmoda, I believe, are the three that should be up with me. And I'm going to go to the first question from Beth.
Yes. I think I'm unmuted. I'm stuck on the question to direct the General Secretary to identify the barriers to full participation or something like that. I guess I would like an example or two, if you could quickly, of the things that need to be changed, because I guess I'm of the opinion that I thought we'd already done this work. Sorry.
It's okay. You had a lot of questions before that little opinion. Thank you, Beth. John or Murray, do you have a couple examples so we can get a sense of the kind of work still to be done?
Murray, do you want to respond to that one?
I can do my best here, John. Barriers of participation. Well, when we think about the practices of relationship in equitable standings, we're looking in the context of nation to nation. So I think that's the best way I could bring that into some light. John, if you can add on to that.
Yes, we simply need to move forward in light of the principles that the General Council has already adopted. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to be who they are and to establish self-governance their way and in their time. And that's what the Indigenous Council is asking, that the Indigenous community of faith be given time to establish its own system of self-governance in its own way, in its own time, and to provide a framework that will protect this and enable it to happen. And so that we can work along with the wider church in equity as brothers and sisters working on an equitable basis, but allowing the Indigenous church to simply be who it is and to determine its path forward.
Thank you, John. Beth, does that kind of answer your question? What I'm hearing is that what we've already done is some steps, and that there are still more steps to be taken. And this is the suggested process that we follow to carry on the work to get to a point where we're more happy with where we're at, I guess. But that's me trying to hear Murray.
Yeah, two additional points I'll add on to what John said. It is a step-by-step process. So basically, there's for the Indigenous Church, it's an evolutional stage. So in self-determination, and the important step to the road to acceptance with the United Church apologies to Indigenous peoples. There are over 600 First Nations, each with our own cultural protocols and traditions, and it's complex. So we have complexities, and this movement and walking together is part of this. United Church also has great complexity in its membership as well, as was stated in the video. But we just want to take the next big step to walking together as equals on this spiritual journey.
Thank you, Murray. And I'm kind of seeing out the side of my eye where I can see the chats. It looks like some people are throwing questions in there. If you'd like to ask your question, and I hate to encourage more questions. I mean, I don't hate to encourage. I want all the questions, but I just want to make sure we ask the right questions in this space. If somebody has an answer in the chat, great. But it's not the formal way to ask your question. It's hard to monitor all the things. I'm sorry. Murray Spear, another question from you.
Yeah, so certainly when we did the comprehensive review and it resulted in the restructuring, we knew that there were going to be further steps and further input and further discoveries by the Indigenous Church about their best way forward. I'm wondering about some of the components in the restructuring, things like the concept of dual belonging, the right of dual belonging, things like the increased Indigenous influence on the whole church. And I'm wondering if the intention of the, sorry if I'm using the incorrect terms, the Indigenous Circle or the Elder Circle or the group that's bringing this proposal forward, if the intention is that those components of the restructuring would continue as or if those are sort of then kind of left behind as part of a different vision. I'm just hoping to understand some of that, where some of those little pieces get left in this proposal.
Thank you, Murray. John, you have an answer?
Well, I believe those components would remain the same, that each Indigenous community of faith has the right to place itself where it chooses to connect with the church, with a non-Indigenous region, or with the National Indigenous Circle, or with both. That's their prerogative. But at the present time, with the new structure that was established by the church in 2018, was it? It had an immense impact on the Indigenous communities of faith. The people felt that a rug of self-governance, self-determination was pulled from under our feet, and we're still sort of in a place of limbo. And there is an urgent need for the Indigenous Church to establish its own self-governance in connection with the wider church, and to establish it in an equitable way as equal to equal brothers and sisters, and that the church must that we must work together with patience and diligence and mutual respect, and allow the Indigenous Church to be who it is and establish its own system of self-governance.
Thank you, John. I got a few more questions here, and we got a few more questions. We got a few more minutes. So far, I'm pretty content. Let's keep going here. Next, I have Susie McPherson with a question.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to, the question I have is in terms of reparations and the apologies, where are we at? What has been done? So for example, the loss of or the banning of spiritual practices and residential schools, loss of languages specifically, where are we at in making amends for that? That's a question that I have when it comes to this topic. Egusani.
We have a long ways to go, Susie. There are so many things to be addressed as we move forward. With the colonial system that has been so hugely oppressive in so many ways, and I don't need to enlarge on that, people know, but the road to reestablish Indigenous languages, Indigenous culture, Indigenous faith and spirituality is so extremely important for the Indigenous church. And in retrieving it and reviving it and living it and sharing it with the wider church, it will be an immense gift, and not only for the wholeness of the Indigenous church, but for the wholeness of the whole church. It's going to take time.
Thank you, John. Kathy Yamashita, another question.
I just was wondering what the Indigenous Council's relationship will be with the United Church Manual. Is just a question.
Would you like that one, Murray?
Sure. So your question is the National Indigenous Council and in reflection to responding to the manual. Well, this is it. Is that we are within the manual itself. In what we're seeing and how we're actually acting isn't reflective to basically to the actions of what's been currently happening between General Council Executive and the National Indigenous Council. The idea that we've been working on and acting on is this equitable seating at the table that we're all present and equated to. But in the manual, it states the opposite. It's not stating that we're not really at the same eye level, that there's a hierarchical presence, which is not the presence of what the Indigenous church circle represents. So this is what we're trying to work towards. This is what we're trying to give vision to and walk with the General Council in light with the National Indigenous Council and the Elders Council.
Thank you, Kathy. You're good there. I did realize I am remembering. Excellent. Appreciate. Oh, yep. That we do have one more proposal to get to as well in our limited minutes. So just a reminder to folks. Maria, do you have a question?
Yeah, and I'll make this as quick as possible. Actually, I just want to draw people's attention. I saw a couple questions in Zoom that as far as I could tell, weren't really touched upon. One was like, is this essentially creating a church within a church, or like we're past the days of separate but equal? Or yeah, I think there was just some confusion about that, and including like how this could relate to any minority within the United Church of Canada.
Thanks, Maria. John or Murray, do you have a answer?
I think the Indigenous Church will always see itself as a very important and critical part of the United Church of Canada. the Indigenous Church is simply seeking to move forward in an equitable way with all the rights and authorities of a region to establish the Indigenous way of self-governance. These are the principles that the United Church has already uplifted by their adopting of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, on adopting the calls to the church, and also the TRC recommendations to the church as well. It's time now for the Indigenous Church to be who it is and to share who it is, to be stronger within the United Church of Canada, and indeed in so doing to strengthen the United Church of Canada.
Just to add to that, for Maria here, we really need to look at the caretaker's report, the calls of the church, and not just one portion of it, like not just number 8 or number 4, but the entirety of it. Read that document thoroughly. If it was given as a whole, it can't be separated. I really think that that's the respects to our theology, land theology, oceanic theology, to the respects of who we are within our languages. Many Indigenous Christians across this great land within the United Church, we're umbrellaed under the Indigenous umbrella. We come from many different nations, and we see ourselves as nations. I always like to use this term. The Indigenous Church, the National Indigenous Council, is the United Nations of the Indigenous respects of Indigenous peoples of the many nations across this great land.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you, John. I appreciate the questions and the answers. I'm going to move us along to GS10. It's a big topic. There's lots to discuss. We definitely did not answer all questions here. Please do put your questions for NIC01 into the Q&A and feed loop. We will get you answers from John or Murray or whoever is best placed to answer those questions. So I'm going to invite Arlis Schibut for GS10 to give a quick info piece there. And I see, Dawn, I think your hand came up somewhere in between my transition. I'm hoping we can get to Arlis now, and if you need to answer your question, ask your question here.
It's for Arlis.
Excellent, sweet. So Dawn, if you want to keep your hand up, Susie, if you can drop your hand, or if I can get a tech to put Susie's hand down, I believe it's just still up from the question before. Arlis.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased to offer just some notes about GS10. My colleague Teresa Burnett Cole we were doing this together. Teresa is the General Counsel Executive bridge person to the National Indigenous Church. One word that was new to me when I read this proposal is the word decolonial, not post-colonial, but decolonial. And Teresa, who is writing on this topic, was able to share with me that post-colonial refers to a chronological time, and that's a term used by people and by scholars in India. The term decolonial is the description of similar work that happens in North and South America. And so we use the word decolonial or decolonizing the church. I think from the questions that we've shared for clarification with Murray and with John may flow very well into this proposal. And this proposal we could have done this 4 years ago, but I think we're all, as Murray and John said, taking steps and trying to figure out our next steps with grace and reconciliation together. And the theological part of this for me, if you can imagine that Moses and the Israelites are at the Red Sea, and God clears the barrier of the sea so that the Israelites can continue on their journey. And the Indigenous Church is requesting that the General Secretary clear a similar path for them by removing structural barriers in the United Church that would preclude the Indigenous Church from continuing their path of self-determination. And so there will be times, you know, as the Indigenous Church moves through their work, that they will, that our structure in our colonial settler church will need to be changed. And so they have, the proposal talks about removing those barriers and authorizing a category 3 remit to approve a new structure of the Indigenous Church within the United Church in relationship. Also putting it out to study in the church and reducing the time from 24 months to 12 months for that remit, so that we do not, so that we don't hold back anything, you know, any of the necessary work that the Indigenous Church is seeking to do. So it's a way of clearing the pathway, clearing a structural pathway in the settler church, so that the Indigenous Church can continue to do its work, and along with that, that the settler church can also continue to support and learn as we have been through this whole process.
Thanks, Arliss. I recognize that Michael Blair may need to join in here if he has answers to questions as well. Just heads up. Don, you have a question for Arliss.
Okay, it's interesting. My question actually came out of GS10, but it seemed to relate more to what John and Murray were talking about. I'm basically disposed to go along with all of that. I like all of it, except I have one nagging question. The early church was plagued with a syncretism with the surrounding religions, in which they sort of piggybacked on the Christian faith, but they were part Christian and they were part the surrounding. And when I listen to some of the language, I hear what sounds like a syncretism here also, and I'm not sure if I'm really understanding it correctly. Probably the question would be, what would be the relationship of the Indigenous National Council to the doctrinal articles of the United Church?
I think that's a question that the Indigenous Church needs to work through. I think that's what I think that's a question that I can't answer.
And I appreciate the question, but I don't know that our -2 minutes is enough time to fully get into that either.
Oh.
I'm going to give Michael, do you have anything you want to add there? No. Okay, cool. Sorry, Don, do you have another? Is that it?
No, that's it.
Is that it? It's a big thing. But
good to see you, Don.
Yeah.
Susie, do you have a question? Susie McPherson, I see a hand up there.
So basically what I'm hearing then is that white Western Christianity is the Christianity. Anything that isn't that is not Christianity, from the person that just asked the question about syncretism. Because to me, Christianity is being who I am as a Cree Indigenous woman, not like you are as a white Western person. That's what Christianity is to me, to be who God made me to be.
for the questions, Susie. Arliss, do you want to give a go? Yeah.
No, I just think this goes hand in glove with the previous proposal, as Murray and John said. You know, one, we're moving ahead, and this removes some of the structural barriers so that the Indigenous church doesn't, you know, so we don't slow down things. You know, we have to keep we have to keep all of us moving. We have to part the waters, you know.
Thanks, Arliss. So yeah, we are, you know, I honor the questions. We are trying to get more information to make decisions on the proposal before us. So if you do have questions, we're going to try and keep them to there, but thank you for the question. Definitely a good conversation to continue to have. Michael, you have your hand up.
So just to probably add to what Arliss has said and to probably come at it in another way, is that with when we approved the calls to the church and the initial restructuring of the Indigenous church, we knew that there was further work to be done. And as that work is being done, we recognize that our manual processes get in the way. And one of the challenge has been that if we want this authentic relationship with the Indigenous church, then the Indigenous church shouldn't be coming to the settler church cap in hand to say, ask permission. And so this is about trying to move some of the structural things that allow for it to be a more authentic relationship in the Indigenous church, defining itself as the calls to the church is very clear about, and working in terms of how we live together as the United Church of Canada.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm not seeing any other questions now. We have hit over time. We don't have a lot left. So I'm going to end the formal questions in this part now, but thank you everybody for your patience, for your questions. As I said, the questions don't end. You can still put your questions in the Q&A section of FeedLoop. We do want to get your questions there. We do want to hear, we want everybody to get the most out of it before we get into the discussion group, so we can have the fulsome discussion going on there. Don, you have a really quick question that you need to get out?
Can somebody email how you get into Q&A? I can't find it.
Absolutely. We will make sure that you all get to see the Q&A. You can find that. We will handhold you through it if we have to. I know the tech support might hate me for saying that, but that's what we're going to do, because we want to make sure everybody gets to do that properly. Thank you. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel. We're here for another set of proposals. It felt kind of rushed, but not too bad. We got through stuff in close to time. I'm proud of everybody. Thank you for your patience and understanding, your grace as we worked through this. There's a lot to fit in, but I hope it's worthwhile. I hope we are providing an opportunity for a bit of questioning, getting some answers so we can learn. We can discuss in the chat part in FeedLoop 2. I don't want to limit discussion. We can discuss all we want. Talk with your friends, your neighbors, call everybody, like chat all you want. In this session, though, we're just trying to learn with the question and answers. And that's what the Q&A part of the FeedLoop is for too, is for formal questions and some answers, but not for debate in there. But the chat part, let's like have respectful conversation where we need to have respectful conversation. I'm going to keep my announcement short. Just a reminder to come back next week if you're interested in those topics. You'll also find the recording in FeedLoop afterwards, and you can also watch the live stream as well. As we close, I will invite a word from one of our partners.
Aisha Francis, and I am the Executive Director of Kairos, the Canadian Ecumenical Justice Initiatives. I'm here from Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit Indigenous peoples. And this is going to be essentially my first full year of walking through this process with the United Church and being a part of the GC44 as part of the Partners Council. And I think what is an area of interest for me, a question and or a comment, would be as an organization, we are looking at different ways of transforming the way that we work and incorporating different ways of being and doing and approaching our work. And I am curious to see how we can build some of those pieces into our strategies, where we lean into maybe some, Indigenous or more other ways of approaching the work and doing the work that sometimes is outside of the way that we have very rigid agendas with very rigid outcomes at the end of that, and giving more time and space for discerning and the welcoming of different approaches to the work.
Friends, just as we prepare to have our blessing and to move into the night, I was asked if we could take a moment for prayer. And so I'd like to ask if we can take a moment for prayer. And just a reminder, since the last time we've gathered, things have happened in the world. Many things have happened in many places in the world. And one of those places is Ukraine. Today, I was asked what the United Church was doing as it relates to what is happening to the war that is in Ukraine, the invasion and the war. And so I'm putting links in the chat for commissioners to be able to understand not only what we've said, but the actions that the church is taking. Would you take a moment to pray with me? Holy One, as we come to the end of our gathering tonight and prepare to go into whatever is next, maybe bed or a cup of tea or just sitting and chatting, we give you thanks that we've been able to be together. We give you thanks for the questions and the answers and the more questions that have come out of this night. And we pray that you will help us in the learning and in the discernment. Tonight, we look outward and we pray for the folks of Ukraine. We pray for peace in their land. We pray that the war that is there would come to an end for the children, for the elders, for the adults, for everyone across that land. We pray that your deep peace would fill those leaders that are pushing this war, that are making this war happen, that are causing the death and destruction. We ask that you would help us to be a part of the caretaking that needs to happen, the peacekeeping, the peacemaking that needs to happen. Help us, God, in all of these things. And bless us as we go on our way. We ask this in the name of Jesus, in the power of the Holy Spirit, and in the Creator's love. Amen. And I'd invite you to share the video blessing this time.
Bien-aimés, soyez braves. Bien-aimés, soyez audacieux. Bien-aimés, soyez bénis.
Au revoir, mes chers amis.
Thank you.
Au revoir et à bientôt.
À bientôt. Good night, all.
Good night.
Robin, Bamapi.
Bye tout le monde.
Blessings, everyone.
Je vous aime.
Bonne soirée. Night in Newfoundland. Thank you so much.
Bonne nuit.
Salamat.